I'm Phil Dellio, and I'm joined by Nate Patrin tonight. And I wanted to speak to Nate. I found out probably, I don't know, within the last few months that he had just published a book on the same topic that I published a book on. Mine goes back to 2020. Nate's published this year, 2024. And I'll hold up mine and then Nate can show you his. Mine is You Should Have Heard Just What I Seen. I've done many Zoom casts with Scott Woods on this book. And Nate, you got your Sandy?
Oh, yes. Sorry about that.
No problem.
Right here.
The Needle and the Lens, Pop Goes to the Movies, From Rock and Roll to Synthwave. Okay, great. And that's University of Minnesota Press, I think.
Yeah, my second book with him.
Okay, mine self-published, available on Amazon, which is, I'm sure, as I know, Nate's is. So we're going to talk about, we've got overlap in our books, things that we approach differently. I read Nate's book, finished it a couple of weeks ago. Took a little longer than normal because I was reading a PDF and I'm not very attentive to reading every day when I'm reading off a computer. I'm more of a coffee shop type guy, but very much enjoyed the book and was
Thank you.
really glad to see some things that we agree on that are in there. I've got sort of some questions to guide this along. If my screen goes bright, I'm just cutting over to some things I jotted down. So I'll start with the most obvious question of all, Nate, which is tell me some key films that just first got you to notice how pop music was used in movies.
Well, I think it really started to kick in when I was in high school. I do remember, like, some instances probably of when I was younger of, seeing some films and I think, oh, they use, some pop song or another, but none immediately come to mind the same way that, like, kind of like the real formative influences for me were, generally starting around 94, 95. Like the big thing for me, and this is like senior year of high school, so it's has that sort of indelible connection, is Pulp Fiction, which is
Right.
Tarantino kind of uh, picking up the thread that he, started with Reservoir Dogs, and kind of, using these semi-obscure, semi-forgotten sort of, period piece kind of songs to sort of instill this sense of kind of what I would call almost like a, time erasure. Like, Pulp Fiction is one of those films that is definitely like you can tell it was made in the early mid 90s, but it's also, very, very steeped in the idea of like the past and nostalgia not necessarily being the kind of thing that is, disposable or ephemeral as everyone thinks. And there's like and that also carries on, of course, to the Tarantino film I write about, Jackie Brown, which is it's a very, kind of powerful recurring thread in that film, in part owing to the kind of like minor but very notable place that this the Delphonics hold in the soundtrack, as this kind of a sort of conversation piece and recurring motif. But I think like the next, and the funny thing is, like, it really started to kind of become really noticeable to me when I started watching sort of a succession of films in the late 90s. Like, I'm not quite like a hardcore. I was born in the wrong decade nostalgist for the 70s, but it was like in part because of, like, hip hop sample reverse engineering and also just general record store haunting. I really was like kind of getting immersed in, like, digging through back catalogs and you know figuring out like what I liked that was before my time, more or less. And there is like a succession of period pieces, like, Martin Scorsese's Casino, Spike Lee's Crooklyn, Paul Thomas Anderson's Boogie Nights, Sofia Coppola's Virgin Suicides, and then going back, a few years after it came out and watching Dazed and Confused. These are all sort of like, oh, these are like all very different perspectives on the 1970s, like all wildly different perspectives, and it's like reflected in the choice of soundtracks. Where like Crooklyn is very heavy on classic funk and R&B. Sofia Coppola's Virgin Suicides has a lot of like interesting glimpses of like uh, pop music that is I think from I would say kind of like the perspective of like a woman record geek, like, oh yeah, like Carole King and Heart. And there is and obviously Scorsese's soundtrack work. I mean, Goodfellas is obviously the gimme, but I think Casino was one where it was very like it was the first Scorsese I'd seen in theaters, and just the way he used this music in tandem with his and Thelma Shoemaker's editing was like really knocked me for a loop. It was like, oh wow, this is like, as somebody who came of age, uh, sort of wrestling with the idea of like MTV and music videos, and do music videos kind of corrupt the ideal mental picture that people used to get, when they listen to music on the radio. It kind of instilled in me like, oh yeah, you can have these really cinematic juxtapositions with music that bring an entirely new atmosphere to it.
Okay, yeah, the late '90s definitely key for me because I think you mentioned two of the three. They're almost like a trilogy in my mind, which was back to back to back. I'm trying to think of the correct order. I believe Boogie Nights comes first. Rushmore was huge for me.
Oh yeah.
Wes Anderson, I won't go off on a tangent. He is now one of my least favorite directors, but I still love Rushmore to death. And then the Virgin Suicides, those three films. I've always been
Mhm.
kind of mixed on Casino. Uh, I love Don't You Hear Me Knocking, Rolling Stones. When it starts, I mean, the way he uses it, it reflects my feelings on the song. The first 2 minutes I love, and then I don't like that song at all after the first 2 minutes when it gets into all that other stuff.
I love it front to back. I'm sorry.
Okay,
Like
no, that's fine. Many
I am a
people
sucker
do.
for I am a sucker for a noodly Latin inflected jam. That's
Yeah.
just the way my brain is wired.
And they use that, Scorsese used that in the trailer too, and got me so
Mhm.
hyped for Casino. And there are things I like. I really like Mickey and Sylvia in it. Love is Strange. The slow
Mhm.
motion, the signature Scorsese thing where De Niro meets Sharon Stone for the first time. But then for me personally, to see him, mess around with something like Devo's Satisfaction, it was just not good for me. Many people love that. I know.
I thought it was kind of funny to like juxtapose like, yeah, like Diva when he's like in this like you know schmoozer mode, like in a shark skin suit trying to be, a local TV celebrity. It's
Okay,
it's
couldn't
it's a pretty
remember
funny
how.
juxtaposition, I think. But yeah, sometimes you do get these like kind of you uh syncs that feel like dissonant or off or irritating for some reason. I know A.S. Hamra, who's one of my favorite film critics going right now, wrote something recently for, I believe it was N plus one. He writes for N plus one and The Baffler and a few others, but he's talking about how Anatomy of a Fall has this recurring bit with this like the steel band cover of 50 Cent's PIMP,
Yes, yeah.
and like the way it was used over and over and over again. It was just it like he basically zoomed in on like how it felt almost torturous.
Wasn't that the song that the guy was playing upstairs when the
Yeah.
fall in question happened? Yeah, yeah, that was interesting. I was going to say, Pulp Fiction's actually playing at a local rep tonight because it's the 30th anniversary.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
Pulp Fiction,
you're gonna make me feel real old instead of kind of old.
yeah, yeah. um, we're obviously a different age. I don't know how much older I am than you. I'm 62.
I'm
Uh,
I'm uh I'm 46.
Okay, so Pulp Fiction, Reservoir Dogs hit me hard. I love Reservoir Dogs. Pulp Fiction was actually, believe it or not, and just in terms of music, and as a film too, is a little bit disappointing to me.
Hmm.
I don't think the soundtrack of Pulp Fiction comes near to Reservoir Dogs. And I'm glad you wrote about Jackie Brown. I love Jackie Brown. We picked a different song, but I think Jackie Brown musically is a far richer film than Pulp
Yeah.
Fiction. I think
And
Reservoir.
I like, yeah, and going back to Reservoir Dogs, I do like the whole radio station framing of the soundtrack
Oh,
was
love
it
it.
was
Steve
a
Wright.
really nice touch.
Yeah.
Shout outs to Stephen Wright,
Yeah.
Um, but
No.
yeah, but like I do have a place in my heart for Pulp Fiction because it's it was my first his,
If I was
and it was
younger, I think it would have hit me just like, especially if it's, I don't know if that was, you'd already seen Reservoir Dogs, right? When you saw Pulp Fiction?
not yet. No, I saw Pulp
Okay.
Fiction and then I went back and saw Reservoir
So
Dogs.
that would make a huge
Like
difference.
I was like 17.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
Exactly.
um,
I was
so
just going to say to answer the question I asked you, for me, it was about the same age, but it was like American Graffiti had an incredible impact. Uh,
mhm.
Seeing The Graduate on TV, I was so glad you wrote about The Graduate because I think in the whole history of pop music and movies, that is a neglected film. I think people,
Mhm.
just because the film has fallen a little bit out of favor, now 67, the film is Bonnie and Clyde, of course, and The
Oh, yeah.
Graduate is not among film critics that I remember Ebert slammed it once. Anyway, I think the soundtrack of that does things that no movie had ever done before, even the Richard Lester films.
And I
Uh,
think yeah, just how it kind of came into being. Just um,
yeah, you told that
Mike
story.
Nichols was like, oh well, we were going to use this as a temp track, but I think this actually fits.
Yeah, I know. This song you wrote about Sounds of Silence, which I love.
Hmm.
I picked April Come She Will, which I just
Hmm.
uh, I guess because the song's not as overplayed as Sounds of Silence. I just
Yeah.
love he tells the whole story of that affair and what's going
Oh
on
yeah.
with Dustin Hoffman passing in and out of the room. So I love that. This question does, when you hear pop music and movies, you may not, I think they're both great. I don't know if you have a preference. Do you like it when a song is there to kind of embellish or amplify or match the mood of what's going on? Or do you like those weird things where a song is just used as total disconnect? I can give many examples of each that I love. Do you have a preference for one or the other?
Oh, it really depends. I mean, sometimes it feels like there's cases, and I mentioned this in uh, I kind of feel like Baby Driver is one of the examples of of a a movie where the syncs are so dead on and so like okay, yeah, this works, but it works in a way that almost feels like it's showing off.
I know too literal can be
Okay, yeah, I mean, yeah, I love, Focus's Hocus Pocus, and okay, seeing, this really high energy foot chase set to it is pretty cool, but it's also like, yeah, but I mean, I can't quite explain like why it kind of falls into that uncanny valley of, like, okay, it's cool, but it's not quite like shocking or surprising. It's sort of just,
well,
I
I
mean,
know what you mean. And
it's neat, but it's not quite the same as like
well,
well,
I'm going to contrast that with you're saying that was used in a car chase, right?
I don't know,
Uh,
foot chase, but yeah.
Foot chase. Okay. Well, to me, a great contrast would be Boogie Nights, where when they're trying to get away from Alfred Molina, they use Jethro. He uses Jethro Tull's Fat Man, which was just amazing. like
That that entire scene, yeah.
I love that
Yeah,
song,
was
but
that like that drum solo, was it in the
who thinks of
yeah.
Jethro Tull for a car chase or a car getaway scene? So I know what you mean.
Well, that's actually a pretty good example too, because I mean, yeah, well, that's actually a twofer because, well, for one thing, I love that whole scene because it was has a great gag about, when you make a mixtape and you run out of room on one
Yeah,
side,
that is great. Yeah.
but the like Sister Christian by Night Ranger is one of those songs that I never really thought was like cool or
Oh,
even necessarily good. But in that scene in particular, it absolutely found its level. It's like,
fantastic.
I
Yeah.
cannot imagine this scene without this song or the song without the scene anymore.
Yeah.
And then to kind of like juxtapose that with a like okay, then you go from like this, AOR arena rock to the, you know, upbeat new wave synth pop of Nina's 99 Luft balloons, and that's where things go haywire. Is a hilarious touch to me, I
Well,
think.
you
Just
also
like,
have to throw in to me that has, and I love, and I got to be honest, this has to do with my age. That film introduced me to Sister Christian. I did not know that song at all.
oh
Um,
yeah. Yeah, that was kind of like that one of those weird vague radio presences I
yeah,
remember.
I stopped listening to radio when
Like,
that was a hit.
what is this song about?
I know. Also, in that scene is an amazing use of Rick Springfield, Jesse's Girl, and that
Yes. Oh God, the zoom
great
in where,
moment where
yeah,
the song's
Dirk
playing.
is like, why am I here?
Yeah, you know, they have that close up of Dirk and he smiles, and it's
Mhm,
like he's hearing the song and he's thinking about amber waves, and in the
mhm,
middle of all this chaos, the smile crosses his face, which is such a
mhm,
beautiful moment.
mhm,
Sister Christian was a great choice. I went with Magnet and Steel, which is a song I love,
mhm.
and that's got my favorite part of the movie where he asks them, you know, what are these characters' names? And they tell him the names. He goes, "Those are great names," and then they go right into Magnet and Steel.
Yeah,
I
I
recite
think
that
well that
scene.
was like the hot tub scene set to Ohio Players I Want to Be Free. And then like the crescendo where it shows like the name Dirk Diggler and lights and everything
Yes.
explodes.
Okay.
It's
Now
like,
I know. Yeah. Yeah. There's just so much in Boogie Nights.
oh God, yeah.
Yeah. There's no real right answer for that. I mean, I love instances of, counterpoint where somebody, and an example would be for me. I don't know if you ever saw the documentary R. Nixon. Did you see
No,
that?
no.
Where it was just all home footage from
Hmm.
Haldeman and Nixon's press guy, Ron Siegler, I think, or somebody else. Anyway, she assembled all these home movies, and over the opening credits, she used Tracy Ullman's "They Don't Know," which is, the
Hmm.
last thing I would ever expect in a Nixon film. You think it's going to be, of course, like Jimi Hendrix or Buffalo or For What It's Worth or whatever. And
Yeah, or
that just threw me for a loop. And then the
Ohio.
song worked on top of that because she's singing, "They Don't Know." It's like her secret love. They don't, I can't even recite
Yeah.
it now.
They don't know about us and they have never heard of love. Yeah. I
They've
love the
never
Kirsty McCall original. That's like one of my all-time favorites.
Oh, I love the song. And that describes Nixon's staff relationship with Nixon. They just worship the guy. And it was just such a great choice and right out of left field. So I love moments like
Mhm.
that. But then, I love stuff like Both Sides Now and Mad Men, which is supposed to be so nostalgic and it just works perfectly. That's where the song matches the moment perfectly.
Oh yeah. And one other example I like to bring up is recently like that actually worked simultaneously as a like left field like where the hell did this come from, but it also like works really well is that movie Megan, that sort of technological horror movie about a killer AI android, which is a very, like sort of like Joe Dante-esque kind of take on the kind of horror comedy genre. And there is a scene where, it's like this, evil, robot that, is, basically like, well, it's a young girl slash evil robot. Basically, it's kind of like Child's Play in that sense. Only it's like it's a a bit like the robot looks a bit more realistic and humanoid, and
Right.
therefore creepier. And she goes on a killing spree because that's what the inevitable the inevitable endpoint of AI. And at this one point in the film, which actually kind of like went viral on TikTok before the movie came out, she's like Megan is doing this like really weird kind of like uncanny dance, and the soundtrack is this song by this disco group called the Scat Brothers, "Walk the Night," which is this like really sleazy like kind of like campy horror like sounding like hard rock disco song that's
Doesn't
just
Chuck Eddy? I think Chuck Eddy's written about the Scat Brothers a lot.
yeah, it sounds like his kind of thing, but yeah. So it was just a hilarious like, well, this is weird, but it clicks perfect.
Oh, those are the best. Where yeah, it comes
Mhm,
right out of left field, and then you realize that's perfect. Mr. Robot
mhm,
used Gordon Lightfoot's "If You Could Read My Mind," which is like the least Mr. Robot song ever, and it just worked
mhm,
fantastically in terms of the character and what was
mhm.
going on at that moment. Um, Okay, wanted to ask you. So now it's interesting, I've got your book on my laptop here, so I'm just going to very quickly go over the films that you write about.
Hmm.
And I just think that you kind of approach the subject. You have cast a wider net than I think I do.
Yeah,
Everything in
well,
my
you covered both film and TV though, right?
well, and that was my next question, but I
Yeah.
was thinking more in terms of the songs that I used, almost every one of them, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here. For me, I think virtually everyone is in there because it affects me emotionally. I think that you
Hmm.
have a lot that affect you emotionally, but then I think a couple of times you might include something that's in there because it makes you laugh, like Repo Man or Wayne's World,
Oh
or
yeah.
or for Drive, and maybe I'm off here, but you had a song that allowed you to write about a whole genre. So I felt like in your book, and you've got Scorpio Rising, The Graduate, Easy Rider, Harder They Come, American Graffiti, Saturday Night Fever, Killer Sheep, Apocalypse Now, Repo Man, Crush Groove, Blue Velvet, Wayne's World, Jackie Brown, Belly, The Royal Tannenbaums, and Drive. There's a mix there. Obviously, most of them are there, I think, probably because they affect you emotionally. But then I felt
Mhm.
that you were also interested at times in writing about other things besides just like did the song in Repo Man, did that actually affect you emotionally, or did just you thought it was weird and funny and interesting?
I
I guess
mean, a little of both. I mean, I had my older brother had a copy, like a dub tape. I think I forget if it was a dub tape or if it was actually like an actual store-bought copy of the Repo Man soundtrack. And I listened to that a lot when I was like 9
so there's some
and
nostalgia there.
trying to like puzzle out like what some of this stuff was and what it meant. Uh and it was such a kind of odd experience listening to well there's two songs by the Circle Jerks on there. There's that, and then there's Let's Have a War, which is
I used
them
to
in their
like that.
more traditional mode.
That's the
And then
Fear song. Let's Have a War is the Fear
oh
song.
no, is it? Oh, okay, what am I thinking of then? Was geez, now I'm Mandela affecting myself into um
Group
hmm.
Sex, oh, I can't remember much about them, but
Okay, well, in any case,
yeah.
but like this sort of like because I hadn't, well, in any case, like when I was listening to this, I wasn't quite sure like what punk rock was beyond like, okay, this is, when you're playing Double Dragon and you're beating these guys up, I think they're punk rockers or something. I don't know. But you know, so that was sort of like a odd introduction to the genre for me. But it was also like trying to suss out like what these attitudes were and what they meant. And then when I finally got to see the film, and it was in the context of, okay, yeah, this is like the lame version of the Circle Jerks that Otto makes fun of. I was like, I can't believe I used to like these guys.
That was
But
a
in the
funny.
context of the film, it's pretty interesting to me because like it's kind of like this sardonic song. This kind of it's semi-sarcastically, but also like it's making fun of poor people. It's making fun of people on welfare. 10 kids in a Cadillac, and I don't know, what exactly statement they were trying to make with that, but in the context of the movie where, Otto, the protagonist, played, by Emilio Estevez, gets a gig repossessing cars from people who can't afford to pay for them. I mean, it kind of, and seeing like this disillusioned punk seeing this band he used to listen to kind of toy with these sort of semi-sarcastic Reagan talking points. It's like it's almost like a statement of like what did this counterculture turn into? And it's the timing is pretty interesting because like by like 85, a lot of things were happening. Like Black Flag was, trying to become a weird metal band. D Boone died. The Dead Kennedys were going to start, are about to get in trouble for the Frankenchrist poster.
Yeah.
Uh, a lot of the other bands were like, okay, well, hardcore is kind of a dead end. Let's try Americana and cowpunk instead. So it was a very strange transitional time that I had, been able to experience firsthand. And so I was kind of piecing together a personal history of that. So,
It's a good one.
so it's not always like a set, like and it's not only the case, and it's also like similar to the chapter on Drive, where it's trying to kind of uh, suss out the lineage and the motivations of the whole synthwave movement, and whether that, whether there is any, real substance beneath the aesthetic, and trying to kind of come to terms with how like films can sort of uh, cultivate and sort of nurture a scene that might not otherwise have panned out the way people might have expected it to.
Okay, interesting. Um, now, since you did mention TV, let's talk about that. My book is probably about 30% TV. You didn't have any TV. For me, I don't know if you'll agree, starting in about 2010, I think far and away the most interesting stuff with pop music has been done on TV. I'll especially single out, now this comes a little before 2007. I'll single out Mad Men, of course, which is like the summit for me.
Yeah, I was
Sopranos, which
stunned.
comes,
Yeah.
what's that?
Oh, sorry to interrupt. But yeah, like Mad Men, like I was stunned that they're like, oh, okay, they just drop the needle on Tomorrow Never Knows. There you go. That's like
Mad Men has like 40 brilliant musical moments. The
moment.
Sopranos, and just so many. I've got so many TV series in there: Big Little Lies and
Mhm.
Mr. Robot. And, of course, I'm all blanking out now. You did not have any TV, which I'm guessing just right away. Obviously, you like Mad Men. That was just a decision. You were going to kind of stick to films, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's
And I think the dynamic is maybe a little different, I think, because TV is just sort of, TV is a serial form and, films are self-contained. I think that, the effects are similar on a viewer and can also have a similar effect, like a long tail effect on, oh, yeah, Kate Bush got the Stranger Things bump. But
almost happened with the Cramps too, with Wednesday.
yeah, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But I think there's just something like a tangibly different vibe that I can't quite put my finger on as far as just a contrast of I think it's just the way that even well binging has kind of thrown a wrench in things, but I think the way that people kind of get accustomed to a TV series over time, over weeks and then over seasons, I think maybe just has a different cumulative effect than getting a whole soundtrack's worth of songs in a 90-minute or 2 hour movie. Um, I mean, there's still like a lot of experiences I've had watching TV where I've had these kind of like real uh, kind of stark, reactions. Like Poker Face was a great example. There were so many, needle drops on there. Like,
Damn, I didn't watch Poker Face.
oh, it's amazing. It's fantastic. There's uh, there's like at least once every episode. I'm like, wow, I didn't know anybody else really liked this song as much as I do. Like, Taj Mahal's version of "Take a Giant Step"
Oh
is
wow.
in one of the later episodes, and it's used in a really funny sort of montage that abrupts endly in a smash cut. But
Okay, well that's at the top of my list now. I gotta get my hands on
mhm,
that. Well, with something like Mad Men, the end song became like a whole story in itself. You just waited around every episode from actually really from the beginning. Only a handful did not have an end song, and at a certain
yeah,
point, it became a real thing. Like, what? How are they going to end this episode? And then, what started my book and the blog that started my book was Scott Woods, and I, trying to guess what was going to be the final song in Mad Men.
mhm.
So, yeah,
And
it's
uh, and it turned out to be a jingle.
Yeah, it was one guy on, I know you, when I started on the ILX message board, you were still there. One guy on ILX did guess. We were all sort of conjecturing what it would be, and one guy guessed that it would be the New Seekers. Guessed correctly. I've seen a lot of TV series. It's kind of, it's interesting. They don't, the music plays almost no role at the beginning. And then at a certain point, someone says, oh, wow, we can use whatever song we want. Suddenly music's all over the place.
Yeah, well, and it can be kind of tricky because I mean, there is some real notorious examples of shows that either didn't make it to DVD or took forever to get to DVD or streaming because of the clearance rights. I mean,
That's the
WKRP in
problem.
Cincinnati was like the most famous one, I think,
Yes,
and
that's right.
I
Yeah.
think Freaks and Geeks also like ran into a couple of hurdles there. I think maybe.
Okay,
Uh,
that's interesting. I had Freaks and Geeks in my book for I loved of the Grateful Dead in the last episode.
oh
Uh,
yeah, or the whole R.E.P. Joe Flaherty, the whole squeeze box scene. Oh my God.
that was an entire episode around the Who. They used about
Yeah.
3 or 4 songs. They had the great thing with can't remember the character. He was my favorite character. Martin, was it? Anyway, he was watching Gary Shandling on TV, and they were
Oh
using
yes.
a great
Yeah.
Who song from Quadrophenios. Beautiful. Yeah,
Hmm.
that's a good series for music. Uh, More questions here. Now, how do you feel about, because this works for me occasionally, and sometimes I just hate it. And I'll mention one particular film I always use it as an example of when it just drives you up the wall. Pop music is a signifier of era. And for me, American Graffiti is the great example, even though the eras don't quite sync up. It's an early
Hmm.
60s film that's using a lot of late 50s stuff. And the worst example, I always bring up a film called The Flamingo Kid, where they just trot out one song after another, where basically the music serves no function other than to, plaster over the screen. It's now 1964. It's now 19 whatever. And then
Hmm.
probably Forrest Gump is, I don't hate Forrest Gump like some people hate it, but it's probably guilty of that too. So what are
I,
some
I
things that
don't
you
like the
like?
movie, but generally for different reasons than I think other people hate it.
Yeah.
But it
Okay.
it is kind of it like because it's the funny thing is like I was like one of those you know 90s kids who is also like really into like oh, I'm going through my parents' record collection and finding all this interesting, weird old stuff, and listening to classic rock station and getting Jimi Hendrix and Led Zeppelin and all that stuff. And even I thought like, okay, a lot of this is really kind of the most obvious choice you could possibly make.
Yeah.
And I think it was, yeah, it's. I think at that point I was just kind of more interested in like, figuring out like the deeper cuts or how this older music might have translated into newer music. This was like, kind of like around the time that like, oh hey, Neil Young really likes Sonic Youth. And let's see how the generations bridge there. But yeah, yeah. So it just seemed kind of like very, very. It's like, hey, remember this? I'm like, yes, I do. I do remember the Doors. Yes, there was a movie about them 3 years earlier, and it wasn't that good.
Most films that do that, that are guilty of that, are centered around the 60s. But I just thought of one more recently where it's just they use a lot of it is the most obvious 80s stuff. And that was the film about Air Jordan.
Oh,
Uh,
geez. Didn't like I know that it used Sister Christian in the trailer. Did it use it in the film proper too?
can't remember that, but they used a lot,
Hmm.
like, but they started off with, God, Money for Nothing. And they used a lot of songs like that. There were a couple of good moments, but they used a lot of really obvious, okay, it's now 1984. So we're going to
Hmm.
use this.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of a cheat sometimes in that when you kind of pull, that, shallow, obvious choice, it really does kind of like try to play to you know, okay, we want our movie to make as many people as happy as possible. Let's put in a song that makes as many people happy as possible because more people know it. And, that's kind of in contrast, obviously, to, Tarantino's like, kind of record geek crate digging or Wes Anderson's uh,
You can go
or,
too far.
Sophia Coppola is kind of like, sort of, like new wave juxtapositions, and Marie Antoinette was another kind of curious case. I feel like I
Kind of
should
love
have.
that. I know.
Yeah.
I took forever to see it. Someone said, "Oh, I can't believe you love the Virgin Suicides and you haven't seen this." So I finally
Mhm.
watched it. I was just knocked out by Hong Kong Garden and the New Order song that she used,
Mhm.
and some of the weird Aphex Twins, some of the soundtrack music.
Mhm.
Um, so you had one, you had Claire, which I considered too, Claire Denise in your appendix.
Mhm.
What's what's the film in
Will
this?
Travail?
Yeah, Beau Travail. And what's that
Yeah.
disco song that they use? It's a great ending.
Yeah, especially since it is so abrupt and intense, but it also makes sense
Yeah,
just as an
uh,
end cap to such an intense.
Rhythm of the Night. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but now I definitely watch far more English language films than non-English language. But a couple of uh, directors that are not English that I thought I wanted to know if you'd ever consider them, who I think have made a lot of great pop music movies, are Wim Wenders and Olivier Assayas, especially.
Mm.
Carlos the Jackal. And when I watched Cold Water for the first time during the writing of the book, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a better pop music film than Cold Water.
I haven't seen that. The only Assayas film I've seen actually is a Personal Shopper.
Yeah, I don't remember much in the way of music and Personal Shopper.
Yeah,
You
neither
should
do I.
really, you got to
But
see Carlos
Vin
the
Vendors,
Jackal. Carlos
Vin
the
Vendors
Jackal.
though is a good call. I haven't seen like some of his more. Oh, funny enough, I haven't seen like Wings of Desire or some of his more major films. But I did see Alice in the Cities, and
Great.
that one scene where the kid is just standing around vibing to On the Road Again.
Oh, I love that. The jukebox. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's great.
yeah. Which is, and it's just kind of like this quiet moment, but it also is sort of like brings you back to the like the first act of the film where the protagonist is just schlepping around America going nowhere, and then he comes to Europe, and there's canned heat on the jukebox, so he's like, okay, well, you can't entirely escape America.
um, and a different kind, but Paris, Texas has a great Ryder soundtrack.
Mm.
We're down to a minute, Nate. Do you want to end it here? Do you want to do a part two either tonight or another night? Because I didn't get to a lot of stuff. I did want to compare our books in terms of specifics at some point.
Mm. I mean, yeah, if you have some more questions, I think if you want
Yeah,
to do another session, like maybe next week or next
sure.
couple
Why
of
don't we
days,
do
be
that?
good for you.
Okay. Yeah,
Hmm?
I had a couple more questions. I'll think of a couple more, and I did one of that chart I sent you. Okay, where we can
Okay.
talk about films where we have the same songs and different songs. Okay, so thanks so much, Nate, and we're going to sign off
Thank
for
you.
tonight,
All
and
right.
we'll come back with part two later. Okay, take
All
care.
right. Thanks. Yep.
Great
Bye.
to talk to you. Take care, Nate.